Just joking about how you're one of the only guys that we know that sends us that many Instagram memes. We're getting a real kick out of that. Isn't that the funnest thing ever? Like you start to learn your friend group, like what people are going to find funny. So as you scroll through your phone, you're like, oh, I'm going to send this one to Chaz, or I'm going to send this one to Dylan.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. It's a good way to connect.
Hey, Chaz, tilt your camera down just a little bit more.
Okay, that's all. Let's see. That's as far down as it'll go.
Okay, that'll work.
Oh.
That's good.
I need a.
You need a taller chair.
Telephone book. Remember what those were? Yeah,
We've heard the legends about.
Put on my chair.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Hey, that's perfect.
How you have it right now is perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, no, we did just talk to you the other day, but last time we talked to you, you were playing pickleball. Are you still doing that? You look pretty fit.
On rare occasions, yeah, by my lovely wife's want to.
Okay, so the passion might not still be there at the level it was last time.
But it's great.
There was a pickleball fire last time we talked to you, I felt like.
Yeah. Well, pickleball was kind of the craze at the time, I think.
I've aged. Yeah. No, it's a lot of fun. It's really a lot of fun. And it's the only way you can force me out to get exercise and stuff like that. So,
man,
how's the winter been in Billings? Has it been pretty mild?
At times we've had extremely warm weather and then big storms. Big storm last night, as my Crow friends would say, on the res. Just kind of fierce ones come through, and then tomorrow's going to be in the, it'll be back up in the 50s now and melt it off. But it's typical. Just
gotcha. Yeah, I've been seeing some people kind of in your area riding around, and there's like some days where I'm like, man, it almost looks warmer there than it is here right now. Like it just looks like a pleasant 50-degree day, you know?
Yeah. Then a massive storm will blow through, and the highways are killers and that kind of thing. And then it bears off, and everybody here just keeps going, you know?
Cool.
Yeah, it's all right.
Well,
that's good.
Hey, I know I've told you this before, but I'll say it on the podcast just so people know. Like, I love that saddle you made for me, man. I've been riding that thing every day since it got here.
Yeah, that's good to hear.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's been going through its paces, so I've really enjoyed it.
Good. Well, that's wonderful. I appreciate the feedback, and I'll try to do another one. That's good, Ben.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just saw Joe what was that, 2 weeks ago? And I had to congratulate him because he finally got a big horn. I mean, the big horn was really good. Yeah, I think I feel like I might have kind of coerced him into that because the first saddle he got made by someone else, the horn was small, and that's the first thing I teased him about. And so when I saw that new saddle roll off the trailer, man, it's a big horn. So he's doing all right now.
Yeah. That's what you ordered, wasn't it? I mean,
yeah, no, I do. I like everything about the saddle, and I do like the big horn. But when Ben says that the other one was a small horn, it was maybe like a finished out at, I don't know, 3 3/4, 4 inches instead of a big Guadalajara horn like Ben likes. But
yeah, it just looked like one of those little sissy horns. You know, it didn't have a nice punchy look like the one you made.
Ben's got to compensate quite a bit most of the time, so he liked big horns and big trucks and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
Got to.
I got to look back at a picture that I did. Your rough out. I did 4 in a row from through December, January, like that, and I forget which one was yours, but
yeah, I saw it because I think you posted like all 4 rough outs.
I did, yeah. Well, I got all 4 of them done, yeah.
And I was just scrolling through, and I stopped, and it was, it's a rough out, but it was distinct enough that I was like, wait a second, that was my saddle. I just scrolled past, and I went back and looked at it. So hey, so I got a question about that saddle because it's really interesting to me. You got you got a lot of experience doing this, And something I noticed that was different about your rough out than a lot of people's that I'd be curious to hear is pretty much every piece of leather, it seems like, that was on the exterior of the saddle, you have stitching around the edge. Even in places where it seems to me it's not necessarily common to have stitching, um, like on the seat, like where the seat and the fender touch. You'll have to forgive me if my saddle vernacular's not quite right, but like you have the fender is completely stitched around the edge, and then it's completely stitched up there on the seat on the border. So like not a lot of people do that, and I'm curious why you do that. It looks really sharp, but I'm curious.
Of course, the purpose of it is the seat is lined, and there's a little bit of lining on your rear jockey. I'm looking at a picture of a saddle here, and your seat jockeys are lined with just some real light stuff, and it just makes them more firm. I hate to see saddles that have been used and their edges are rolling up, or they might even have a bit of a wave to them just from use and whatnot, over oiling, that kind of thing. It actually started, the guy that started me in 1976 did that. So that's the way I learned it. And then when I worked for Jim Lathrop in the early 80s, worked with him, he would do a stitched edge. And so as far as the fenders go, they're not lined, but I just do them to match the rest of the exterior. I line the latigo keepers. I line the little cinch hanger. Everything. It just firms them up and makes them hold up longer.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. It just and I have my sewing machine set to where it sucks the stitches in real deep. That's been one thing that people ask me about. Well, isn't that going to wear out under there? And it shouldn't. Of course, your rear cinch and your rear billets are lined, and it has to be sewn.
Yeah.
So there was a number of years probably I didn't. I look back at some of the old saddles, but anymore I just stitch everything.
Yeah. Well, it's cool to me, as I talked about looking at those 4 rough outs you made. I know there's probably other guys that do it too, but to me, it makes it like I can pick out a Chaz Weldon saddle. And obviously there's some lines and just maybe I can't quantify it all, but I've looked at enough of your saddles that I can usually see a picture and I'm like, oh, I bet Chaz made that. And then I look at it.
It does make them very distinctive. It's my style. It's become, I've made so many now, one after another. It's definitely my style. And it doesn't take that much longer, really. I have a really good sewing machine, so that's the main thing. You like to spend time sewing. If you had a bad machine, it'd be awful. But.
And then there's just a little bit of a carving in the seat there, in the back. Is that for aesthetics, or is there a purpose behind that too?
Well, you mean like the tickle line?
Sure.
The line that runs parallel to the stitching and everything.
Yes, sir.
Because I don't. It's an absolute mortal sin for me to carve any kind of rough out flower carve.
Right.
So it's just called a tickle line. It's just a decorative thing you can do. You just do it by hand with a tool called a tickler, and you basically just press that impression into the rough out leather when it's damp. And
gotcha.
It's just decorative. I like the looks of it. I do it for me.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing that I feel like is kind of your signature, especially on the rough outs. But it does, I looked at it at first and I was like, well, that's a little different. And the more I looked at it sitting next to like other saddles in my tack room, I thought, that really does, it just makes it look a little sharper. Like you said, that it kind of helps the lines. Even sitting on a horse, it just makes it look sharp. So I
think so. And in this day and age, especially you see so many saddles now, sometimes if you have a little wrinkle like that, that can make your work look distinctive. It's nice.
Yeah.
other guys do it. I mean, it's been around forever, but I don't know if they don't want to take the time. And that's the thing about a rough out. Forever, ever since the first guy, whenever it was, made a saddle out of the rough side out up, they were always considered to be the way lesser quality. The leather then, and still, if you don't buff that rough outside, it's pretty rough. It's shaggy, and the rough out was kind of poo-pooed for a lot of years, and I thought, well, I can get this leather that's nicer, and stitch the edge, put a stickle line on it. It maybe, I think it would make the customer feel like they were getting something a little more distinctive, a little upper cut than just a shaggy old rough out, that they throw around and whatnot. And I still see guys using that rough stuff, and I don't know why. I guess they just want to use it, I guess. I won't.
Hey, so Chaz, let me ask
go ahead,
you,
Ben.
What is your opposition to carving in a rough out seat? And let me just say, someone had given me the opportunity to have that done on a saddle that was made for me, and I didn't want it in there because I just imagined sitting on the fence working a colt, and I didn't want to see carving in the seat. I just like that look of just a smooth, broken in seat. But there's a saddle maker, we both know of, and that's kind of his thing, is carving on rough out in the seat.
Well, number one, it starts, when there again, I got to go. I'm so old now. I go, back to the origin, 1976, and the impression that I was taught, the method I was taught, is that you just absolutely don't do it. If you're going to flower carve something, it's meant to be on the top grain. You cut into the top grain, and you bevel it in, and it stands up nice, and it lasts longer. The rough outside, of course, it's like it doesn't have that top layer of the skin to even hold the carving in place. And so I formed an impression, as I was taught, that it just was absolutely silly. Why would you flower carve rough out? It wears out right away. There's not that top layer in the skin to really hold the carving in place. And so it wasn't even imagined, actually. And so, as a young guy working for those guys, growing up with that, it wasn't even imagined you would do that. And so I formed my opinion on that. The real practicality of the fact is that it does just wear off. There's nothing there to hold it together. I've seen some of those that have been used, and they're just kind of all mashed out. Even tooling the top grain, a saddle that's used a lot, and your legs rub against the fenders and the seat jockeys. It'll wear out. It'll wear plumb out, but it lasts a heck of a lot longer than trying to carve rough out. And so it's just, that's just my opinion as I was taught it. When I first started seeing that, I thought it was kind of a joke or something. Why would you ever flower carve rough out? A little, God, I even saw it the other day. Some guy was doing a full basket stamp rough out, and it's like, I don't know. To each his own. I'm, more power to them. If they see that as being a beautiful thing, I have no reason to doubt them on that. But nothing I'll ever do. I don't even get requests for it. Never even. I suppose people have maybe mentioned or asked or something. We would carve a brand, which is a different deal. Number one, it's the place you put it. Usually put a brand on the horn cap or the back of the cantle where it doesn't have the abrasive use, like in your seat and whatnot. But I don't know. It's just nothing. I don't know. There again, most of the old guys I worked with are dead now. I know they carried that opinion,
Yeah. Well, I guess like they say, right? beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So to each
Absolutely.
their own, right? But that's kind of like those guys
Absolutely.
ordering a big old tomahawk steak in Vegas covered in gold leaf. You're just going to eat the dang thing, right? But it sure does look cool
Right.
coming out on a plate. But
Yeah.
but tell me this, so that leather, now we're not stamping this saddle, but let's say you're building a saddle, rough out, but you want that nice smooth leather. Are you buying leather that's already smooth and sanded, or are you doing that yourself in the shop?
No, it comes directly from the tannery that way. It's called buffed from Herman Oak Tannery. It's called buffed skirting, and even at that, I buy it through a jobber here in Billings, and I go through the hides that they have and select. Well, I don't know what the process is at the tannery. Obviously, it's almost like a sanding kind of a process, because you look at some of the sides and they've missed parts of it, and it's not smooth, it's rough, and so I pass those pieces by. And
Okay. And
so
you don't do anything else with it before you build a saddle out of it in terms of
no,
finishing that.
no, I just cut it
Okay.
out and use it. And of course, then when you dampen any leather and rub on it, it compresses the fibers, and that's what I do with my whole saddle. There's not even one piece of it that I haven't run over it with a piece of wood or a piece of glass or something, and it even gets smoother and all that.
Yeah.
And then it wears in nice. I mean, you'll watch your seat and fenders will get practically smooth the more you use them.
Yeah, come to
Where your
think of
legs.
it, one guy that had one of those shaggy saddles, I think he told me, or he said the guy that made it said the saddle was built that way so it would hold you in there a little bit better. Do you think that's just an excuse for building the shaggy saddle, or do you think people really think
Yes.
that kind of a shaggy, rough out saddle is going to hold them in better?
Well, there's obviously there's just in the composition of the animal hide, the smooth side out is really smooth. I mean, and there's more grip, whether it's buffed or whether it's left shaggy, and that's why I think people like the grip effect of a rough out seat and fenders, and that's why the half breed style has gotten so tremendously popular. Where the seat and fenders rough out and the rest of it can be tooled or stamped, because you've got that tooled and stamped finish to look at, but you're not sitting on it. You got that grip aspect in the seat. It's pretty nice, but it does get wore down pretty smooth, you know.
Mm.
So
Was that the logic? You were talking about when people first started using the rough out side of the leather for the saddle. Do you have any idea kind of what inspired someone to do the first rough out saddle?
well, it had to have been there. I think there's different reasons. I think it seems like at times, I have the luxury of going down and hand picking every piece of leather that I use. But generally, and for years I did the same thing. You'd buy large quantities directly from the tannery, and that's what you get. That's there. I mean, you can hassle with sending it back or something. But if on the smooth side, I don't know, say maybe there was some fault in it. Maybe there was some scratches or they didn't want that on the outside of the saddle. Maybe they turned it over and went, I'm going to use rough out. And I know in this cowboy world, there was probably some cowboy thinking about it and thought, I'm going to try the leather on the rough side, and he liked it. So then the next guy liked it and went back to the saddle shop and became a thing. I collect all the really old catalogs of Visalias and the Rayholes and Hamleys and Porters and whatnot. And you didn't see, rough outs weren't presented much in especially pre-World War One period. When I started in '76, rough out was really predominant. It had been, they'd been making rough out saddles, I'm sure, since the '50s, and we didn't do any flower tooling at that point at that shop. So it's all in what you can sell. I mean, that's why you make anything, is to sell it. If you got something that's going to sell well, um, then you do it. I suppose there's even another thing. Like I said, that there was that long period of time where they were just using shaggy rough out. Maybe they would have a lesser priced saddle. Get a rough out. Get a rough side out for so much less, and they'd sell that way. So I think just different reasons. Some people want a cheaper one. Some people want more grip. Some people just want to be different. I think this all those reasons.
So as a saddle maker, this is something I've always been curious about. As a saddle maker, if I came to you and I said I want a basic rough out, versus I came to you and I said I want a basic saddle with no tooling, but I want the smooth side out, does that really have any impact on like your cost or the labor you put into making the saddle, whether it's a smooth out? Now this is with no tooling either way, right?
Right.
So
my base price encompasses smooth or rough. Gotcha. Either way. There's absolutely nothing harder at the craftsmanship level, not tooling or anything like that, at the craftsmanship level than doing an all smooth saddle, because number one, you have to select completely clear sides with no scratches, no marks on it, and you can't imagine how delicate a piece of damp leather is. I mean, if it picks up any kind of iron from, say, a nail or anything like that, it immediately turns black. I got a button shirt on today, which I never do. You can be working on a smooth saddle and lean over it and scratch it, if you have snaps or buttons. And so you just have to be incredibly careful. And it's just it's all there in front of you. Any little mistake you make in the craftsmanship aspect, it just shows up. So I don't hardly get any requests for that. There was a time, an era, I think people wrote a lot more of those, and they are really slick. I made myself one time, and I was at a friend's house. We went out to gather horses, and I was riding a big thoroughbred kind of mare, and I swear it's like I never ridden in my life. She was jumping sagebrush and stuff, and I literally just held on to the horn with both hands. That thing blew my stirrups. It was nothing to grip to. It didn't have chaps on. With chaps, it's a lot different. There's more leather against leather. There's more grip, So I sold that right away, and I've never made myself another one. But they are slick.
Yeah, interesting. That makes sense, because I have wondered why there aren't more of those. But yeah, I could see where maybe from a practical standpoint, the rough out would work a little better than a smooth side
even
out.
Even your tooling, like you'd get a full flower stamp or a full basket geometric stamp thing. There is more aspect of grip to it. I mean, your leather's disrupted and it's kind of at different levels. There's more grip to that. They're still pretty darn smooth. But given American tradition, if any really popular clinician or roper or whatever came out and started riding a full smooth out saddle, man, it'd be like that for 10 years. I mean, it just depends on the popularity of it, And I hope
that's a good question for you, Chaz. What's the most popular saddle style that's come through during your career that you can remember?
Well, most definitely the Wade, or the Ray Hunt tree, or the Wade. I started out in eastern Montana in 1976, and any kind of slick fork was virtually unknown, and they were great big swells. They were low mooses and Tucson ropers, and the closest we even got would be like a Chuck Shepherd roping fork style. And went on from there. I'm trying to think. By the time I got to to three fork saddle. And, you know, up here, it depends on what part of the country, Texas, Arizona, Oklahoma probably the Wade never did conquer the style of those guys. I'm really good friends with Terry Henson in Texas, has made saddles as long as I have. And you know, we talk about that because he's like, it's a master, because leather covering a big swell is a lot more work, and he's a master at it. And so he was, you know, always remarked about how many Wade styles I've done.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely the Wade up here.
When somebody wants a saddle made a certain way, like, because you mentioned that, you know, all it would take is for some clinician to come through and everybody now wants that saddle. What do? Like, call you up and say, hey, I want a saddle like so-and-so, or do they send you a photo? And like, in terms of that style of, in terms of like inside of the Wade saddle community, what's been the most prevalent like style in terms of like slick out or rough out or like a stamping pattern where you could clearly tell people were trying to get a specific saddle that looked like so-and-so's saddle?
People are still very, very individual on it, even though they'll want a saddle like a teacher or a clinician or something like that. They like the style, the bigger horn, of course, the real slick fork, candles run up and down. People are, you know, hardly ever have they said, I got to be just like that. You know, it's got to be just like Buck's. I mean, down to the nth degree. There's probably been some, I don't remember, but they're pretty individual. They have some people just, the rough out is it, man. I mean, that's the ultimate to them, and other than on the other spectrum, the full flower stamped, you know, and that's why I say the half breed style is, I've made more half breeds than anything, because they can, you know, portray their personalities. You know, of course they can put a brand on it. We'll try different flower patterns. Some just absolutely love a basket stamp or something plain. So they've got a pretty good idea, and that's why I do custom work. You know, I mean, there's been any number of times I've made up saddles just for sale, and they'll grab those up, you know. And but it's pretty basic. I mean, it's, you know, you either have plain or half breed or full stamped saddle. You know, there's not a lot of other styles you can go with that. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
One thing that it seems like has started to get popular, Chaz, and I've seen you've made more of them too, is like they have kind of that maybe more like Texas, Oklahoma type swell in the front, but they still have like a pretty significant slick horn on top of that. That seems to be more popular all the time. I don't know.
Yeah, that's really changed. They've gone from again, back when I started, everybody in the area I was in eastern Montana, a wood horn was unheard of, and it was the smaller metal horn, and, you know, generally they'd wrap it with rubber and that kind of thing. That became the style predominantly around, you know, Montana and Wyoming. And I'll tell you, the Ray Hunt had the most significant impact on the saddlery world. You know, just as an aside to his, you know, incredible impact on horsemanship, because he rode, you know, the old Hamley. You know, it just caught on. Like, you know, the metal horn industry quit up here. You know, it was all wood horns. So that's been a big change. And yeah, the turn towards, I've slowly seen that start happening, where they want, guys just want a little more swell, but they want to stick with that wood horn, which I love. That's a personal preference of mine. I haven't made a small metal horn for a long time. And so there's, in fact, I'm working on one right behind me, if you can see it.
Yeah.
It's got a
That one's a
swell
perfect
on it
example.
with
Yeah.
with a wade horn. It's just basically a kind of a wade with some swells on it,
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just commonplace now. That's
Yeah.
doing as many of those as I am the wades at this point, and that's fine. It was kind of it's a nice little variation. I'll never get tired of doing the wade style because they're easy. I mean, those forks are just so easy, and for, I'm in business. This is, if I can take a very short time to cover it with leather, then it's great. I don't have to spend, a tremendous amount of time. I don't charge any difference in price or anything, I mean, I started out covering those great big swells. So it's what you've been taught how to do it. There's really good methods in covering those like that. So I'm all for it. Yeah.
Chaz, about those metal horns, were those things very strong? Were guys tying off on those metal horns?
Yeah, they're extremely strong. They're made out of cast bronze, and on the end, which you never see, you see the neck of the horn and the cap. Well, down on the end that attaches to the tree, it was either 4 prongs, or it was a square or a rectangular plate, and on the top of your wooden fork, they would set that horn in a ways. They didn't just flop it on top and screw it down. They actually route out the shape of the prongs or the square base, and it's glued in and it's screwed in and then rawhided. So yeah, I mean, that's still what's used today in all the pro ropers and steer ropers and everything, is that same method and style of putting in a horn,
Oh, okay.
And,
So
anything in the world can break, I mean, but it takes some kind of really tremendous kind of wreck to actually, usually another part of the tree will break before that'll pull out, usually across the bars or something.
do you think that's the metal horns are stronger than the wooden wade horns, or are they about the same?
Well, and with the wade style, that's all one complete block of wood that you see. I mean, that whole thing, that fork you see behind you there, that all started out as one block of wood, and it's rough cut and it's laminated for strength. It's a softer, maybe a pine material, and it's laminated with hardwood or plywood or something in layers, because lamination's much stronger than just a solid block of wood, which gives a lot of strength. So up through, I should draw that closer. That started out as one block of wood. So up through the center of that horn, it's probably a piece of hardwood or something. And then they basically rough cut it and then grind it and sand it down. So that's, I mean, you just got to watch so you don't get the base of them really teeny tiny, and, eliminate that diameter piece of wood that would pop off or something. But we've both seen guys rope heavy stock, with those saddles. The slick horn does help, I think, because your rope slides. They're not tying on and just taking a massive jerk,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure they have, but in most cases, probably one of the hardest things is maybe pulling a cow critter into a trailer or something like that, just that hard. But it's usually a really hard jerk that would actually break it, as far as using it roping, a horse flips over backwards real bad or something like that. There's always a possibility of it breaking,
Right.
something rare, more rare, but just everyday use. I've never had one broke that I know of. I mean, nobody's ever brought one back to me or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, from a physics perspective on how to break a tree, even though the same sum total force on a slick horn might hit on something that's tied off or has a rubber horn, like you said, that jerk and that snapping motion where it's kind of like going from 0 to 100 all of a sudden. Yeah, that I guess unless someone had a big some big horn that they decided to make a horn knot for and test it like that, it's really not going to have to absorb the same kind of force that, maybe like a more classic old time Texas style guy with a metal horn and a horn knot on his rope,
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm looking at that saddle again back there. Let me ask you this: has there been a change at all over the years from the rounded skirt versus the square skirt? Because I feel like if you're going to have something with a big swell, you need to almost have it, like, to have it look right. In my mind, it needs to have a square skirt too.
Yeah. Composition wise, it balances out better.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the pointed square skirt has taken on a real popularity. I haven't had any for a while. They're a great old timey look to them. After having them, they probably don't care for them that much. There's just a lot of skirt there, and weight is if weight is any kind of consideration, we always go with the round skirt, and trim off the weight. There again, it's just personal preference. Some people wouldn't have anything but square skirts with round corners. They just that's what catches their eye. I like doing them both. This little saddle back here you can see has the square skirt with the rounded corners, and it's very attractive. I love them for tooling. It gives you more area to tool and whatnot.
Yeah,
and, they end up looking really nice.
So why don't they like the pointed corners?
I think any number of reasons. In building them, I got to be real careful. You can get real big with those, and if you have a horse that's not real big, let's say if the back's not real big, it kind of overpowers him. That pointed square runs into their flank area. It doesn't hurt them anything. It doesn't poke them or anything like that. You just end up with a lot of skirt. I try to build them properly, you see a great number of them where especially the rear jockey will curl up because there's just a lot of leather hanging out there. And I line mine and, make them extra firm in that corner, that pointed corner there. So, you try to have it stay down and not curl up and whatnot. But if that style makes them happy, they love them. They just love the looks of that.
Yeah.
The pointed square.
Yeah. It is kind of like a real punchy look. Like I imagine it, like those square skirts, I imagine them with like shovel seats and post horns and just kind of like a real punchy Great Basin kind of style.
Yeah. I mean, they're like the oldest style there is. You look at saddles made in the 1800s, of course, a lot of them were like 12-inch seats. They rode really short, 12, 14-inch seats. And those
just because they were smaller or?
Yeah. And they rode real long stirrups. If you ride a long ways, you want to have a longer stirrup. It's just more comfortable. It doesn't wear on your knees. And the horses were smaller, and definitely smaller horses. So it's age old, and all of a sudden it took off. I've done more of them in the last couple of years than I have in the last 40. And I like doing them. It's a nice challenge. There's a thing on building a saddle that's called the lines, where you want to have everything nice and parallel, your front and your back and your top and bottom to be nice and parallel. And so with some things like pointed like that, you can really get things nice and lined up, really nice and neat and parallel. The lines of the saddle.
Yeah.
So, they're fun to do.
We had a while back. We had Kerry Schwartz on here, and one question I thought was really interesting to talk with him about, and I'd be curious to hear from you too. Is what? So there are definitely saddles you can see on the internet, and they look really good, like sitting in the shop, like the ones behind you. And then they get on a horse and they don't sit quite right or don't look quite right. And then vice versa. And I mean this with the utmost respect. Like I've even seen a couple saddles that you've made where they're sitting in the shop and I'm like, the proportions look a little wonky on that saddle. But then you can see that same saddle sitting on a horse and it's sitting really nice. And you're like, wow, that saddle looks like it was made for that horse. I don't know if you feel like that. And again, this is my kind of layman eye and what I've picked up. But is that a process you had to go through and learn? I know you have talked about having some good teachers, but how do you go about, making something that's sitting on a stand like that, and then it's going to sit a little different and have different lines around it when it finally gets to a horse? Was that a process for you, or did that just kind of come easy for you?
Well, I guess I'd say the horse wasn't probably that good. So.
There you go.
Need a better horse.
I like that answer. I like that answer a lot.
Saddle's great, man. Yeah. Boy, I don't know. I mean, it probably, more than anything, I guess I think of things that would throw me off of a saddle I made and I see it on a horse is like if the front end was setting up way high, like the horse was, didn't have as much weather on him. That always bugged me, that have that much space between the top of the wither and the fork.
Yeah.
And the other thing would probably be, they're getting back to square skirts. The round skirts are easy. I mean, they kind of, unless you cut them badly or something, cut them weird. I mean, they fit about anything. It seems to me. You get into your square skirt stuff and you don't want them running way uphill. You don't want them running way downhill. You want them basically to look parallel to the horse's back, his top line and his everything. You want the skirts to look nice, like they fit on him nicely,
Sure.
And that's something that you develop over the years with your patterns and just your knowledge of how you cut them, I don't, unfortunately, I don't see that many of mine on horses. I'm trying to think. I made one recently for a lady here that lives close to me, and she got into the AQHA ranch horse competitions, and got a Buster Welch, which is a big front end and a small metal horn and square skirts. It's the style of that competition, kind of a cutting horse saddle look, only way better. And she rides a great big horse. I mean, this thing is gorgeous. And I just kind of made it normal, like I would for her. And I went out and saw it on the horse, and I was very pleased with how it looked and how it fit and everything. It just was like, wow, I guess I'm going to keep doing it like that because I really like the looks of that, And I don't know if that answers your question much, but yeah, you want them to look, it doesn't really, I mean, they need to look good in a shop, but they need to look really good on a horse,
Yeah.
I like that low profile of a fork over the withers. I don't like, like say having the front end sticking up way so high.
Right.
It's just a nice look when a fork will conform. And horses are different. What padding are they using too? Are they padding the heck out of them? To raise the saddle up too high.
Sure.
That kind of stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. With so what's the rub on the cutting saddles?
Well, for by and large, they're a piece of athletic equipment. I mean, they're made for the cutting competitions, just like what we refer to as roper saddles or team roper saddles or calf roper saddles. They're generally made by factories, so they're not as well made. They've got, a really big front end on them, which can be okay. And then they've got those god awful tall horns because they're grabbing on, they're grabbing onto the horn, or they're pushing away from the horn, or grabbing around the horn cap's kind of an oblong shape to it, and I don't know that world. I've never made one until one's going to be coming up in the near future because I took an order for one. They had they had a super flat seat in them. I mean, they called them cutting boards, where, and they were like 17-inch seats, real long, because they're basically bracing against that front end. Their feet are pushed out and they're pushing away from that fork, so they needed more seat length, and they just weren't attractive. I mean, and they were factory made. They were. It's a known fact that the competitive ropers and cutters and whatnot aren't riding really nice custom handmade saddles. A lot of them, they win in competitions and use them, and they've just formulated that attitude of, that's good enough,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Which I understand what you're saying, but I think I could understand where they're coming from. Like you said, it's a piece of athletic equipment. It's not like they're going to spend 10 hours in it every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a different attitude. It's what the champions ride. So the people coming into the sport, it's like, well, okay, that's what I will use too. You don't want to be all different. You want to show up in a beautiful full flowered stamped weight or something, and be such an oddball,
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
exactly.
one
it's
thing
just
I've
the
wondered
standard
about,
that's
though,
been set,
Yeah.
wondered about though too is like
So let
those
me
saddles.
ask you this, because you mentioned the factory made saddles, and I think we touched on it in your last interview, how the saddle shop has kind of become a thing of the past, and now it's guys in their individual operations.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, like a saddle, you kind of control the saddle from beginning to end. When you say factory made, is that different than maybe the saddle shop you started out in? Are you saying factory made as in there's more machinery involved in the making of those saddles?
Yeah, it's vastly different. The shop I started out in, they were the highest quality handmade. There was one saddle maker, and they hired me to start to do repair work. Factories are factories. They'll have, I don't know how many employees or whatever, but they'll have, say, for instance, so I cut, you buy your leather in sides, which are like 4 feet by 8 feet long, and you cut them out by hand, and you fit each piece, individually and stuff. Where factories will have what they call clicker machines, where it's just a big machine that cuts the leather for you rather than cut it by hand, and they'll just pile up pieces. And I don't know if it's, I'm sure they're all different. I don't know if they're like assembly line or whatever, but their number one priority is speed.
Sure.
Instead of flower stamping stuff, they'll have machines that mash down the stamping and whatnot, and then people will come in and maybe do a little bit of hand finishing on it or something like that. And it's just all for speed. They run it through. The trees are atrocious. They want to get the least price and most production type tree, so if people could see the trees in those things, they'd be, and they knew anything about it, they'd be shocked, how awful the trees fit a horse, and there's all kinds of them. I mean, they use synthetic wool instead of real wool. They use the lesser grade of leather they can, just the whole thing. It's always been that way. They've always been known as the lesser end of the saddle trade. No, I'm sure there's a lot of cowboys have ridden them, have had to or not, but most of your cowboys with any kind of pride in their equipment or the work that they do, they'll ride a handmade saddle.
So go ahead.
No, I'm done.
So even back when you were, yeah, you can get off your soapbox now. Even when you were working in the shop, it wasn't like there was one person who was the saddle maker, and so he'd kind of have his own little project. It wasn't, well, I'll cover this, and so will make the fenders, and that's not how it was.
Not when I started, because like I say, there was just it was a 2-man shop, and like I say, they hire you for one reason, so you'll start making them money. I wasn't, it was not the era of, gee, I want to make you feel really good and feel really good about yourself, and you get a blue ribbon for showing up to work or any of that stuff. It was like, you come in day one, you're going to make me money. I'll show you the trade. I'll show you how I want it done right. And so it's the best way to learn. You just start right off by, and you want to do good. You don't want to get fired, and you don't want to make the guy mad. So you learn real fast. And in that instance, when I started, he made the saddle complete from start to finish, and we did a lot of repair work. We relined a lot of saddles. We replaced a lot of stirrup leathers, replaced a lot of horn covers, and so step by step, you learn to build the parts of a saddle. And you don't. You get a saddle in for repair, you don't replace everything on it. You replace mainly those parts. You learn to use sewing machine. You learn the usage of all the different tools and stuff, And in working with him, you learn, proper leather selection and whatnot like that. And then as I progressed, I did very well, and we worked well together. So, for instance, I would start making the fenders and stirrup leathers. I'd do those for him, and then he would build the body of the saddle, hand it over to me. I would oil it and complete it. I'd put the strings in and whatnot. So which was really nice for him, because then he could just move on to another one, and I was gaining invaluable experience in that aspect of it. And then one day he came up and said, "Here's a tree, make a whole saddle," And I did, and then I made another one, and so forth. And so when I left there, it was only 2 years. I just spent a lot longer with him, but he retired after 2 years. So that's a really good way to learn. And I see, but it was still an incredible struggle. I wasn't ready to go on my own. I was very young, for one thing. I wasn't going to open my own shop. I didn't do any flower stamping. So I went out, and for the next 5 years, I just worked for anybody that would have me, pretty much. Picked up information here and there. And so I want to tell these young guys, it was hard then as it is now. I hear a lot of whining about, there's no shops to work for. How am I going to learn and everything? You just do. You just get determined. There's people that'll help you. I know there's still some shops open, some places, whether if they're willing to walk in and be humble themselves to just do repair work and stuff, it's out there. The knowledge is out there, probably more than ever, with the internet. It's unbelievable.
Well, Chaz, let me ask you about that. So you were talking about, working for other people for a while before you went out on your own. At the time that you started your own shop, did you feel like you had kind of waited till the stars aligned and everything was perfect and you were like, all right, I'm going to start a shop? Or did you kind of go out on your own before everything was perfect and you just knew you needed to? How was that transition for you?
By no means everything was perfect, by any means. I had worked for King's in Sheridan for 2 years, and in that 2-year period, I just made one saddle after another. Was able to start flower stamping, flower tooling, and it just felt right. I guess that had always been my intention, and I was that was about 1984 or something like that. And I had the opportunity to move back home. There was an empty house there, on the ranch, and had the opportunity to stay there and have a shop there. So I just did. It was just time for me to do that. I I really enjoyed working with Billy Gardner at King's, a great deal. But he left soon after I did. So
Yeah. Well, and
yeah, I just working in shops, I'd met enough people that they were starting to ask me to do saddles. And at King's, I wasn't allowed to do any custom work at all. They just, and that's fine. That was just their deal. We just make them and put them on the floor, which is fine. It was a great experience, just make one after another. But then too, it's just economics. I'm going to make more working on my own, for myself than I am for somebody else.
Yeah.
So it was a
but
good move.
even outside of, because I'm sure, you feel like you're always getting better. So it wasn't like maybe your saddle making was at this point where you were perfect and you're the master. But like strictly financially, did you go through a period when you first went out on your own where like you were kind of worried about getting the next customer, or you had any trouble kind of kickstarting your own business to the point where you didn't worry about it from a financial standpoint, irregardless of whether or not, you were at a certain point as a craftsman to go out on your own?
Of course I was single. I lived at a house out of my folks' ranch, so I didn't have any overhead. I wasn't even paying them rent. They were kind enough to do that because they knew I wanted to get started on my own. And I had talked to enough people that were requesting stuff from me, because by then I'd worked at, that was about the fourth saddle shop, and I'd been from Billings to Bozeman to Three Forks, Sheridan area. And so it's not like I probably left with maybe one saddle order, but you only need one ahead of you every time. And then that guy'd get one and show it to his friend. And, it's getting orders is probably one of the easiest things. You just do a really good job because people are proud of what they get and they want to show it to their friends and whatnot, and then they'll order from you. So, but then too, I made everything. I made lots of shaps. I made lots of belts, billfolds, folders. You just take anything that comes along, And
Well, so
because there was, I had to find.
yeah, let me hone this down a little bit more, even because you mentioned, younger saddle makers having their O's and woes about not having a place to learn or not being able to get started and this and that. I'm curious from your perspective, what you think the younger saddle makers today are having the most trouble with in getting started, because I'm sure, in terms of making the saddle itself, not much has changed, but in terms of the economy and who's buying them and finding mentors, and even, like you had a terrific deal, but I'm sure there's a lot of people that, they feel like they don't have a place to work at home if they're young, or maybe they're already on their own. And like, I don't know how much work goes into becoming a full-time saddle maker, whether or not it's something you could do on the side while you hold down another job and you're learning the skill before you can kind of do that full time. But what do you think, from your perspective, young saddle makers are facing the most in terms of challenges to starting their own business, or even before that, just kind of finding a mentor and starting to practice?
Good question. There really isn't a saddle school that I've heard of that would be worth going to. There probably is. I just haven't heard of it.
Sounds like horse training.
You got to be real careful about. Yeah. You got to be real careful too, because they're again, they're made for speed. There's a guy in Sheridan I think is doing a really nice job. He's a good saddle maker. I've put other guys onto him. Just a lot depends how quickly you learn. I think it's a bad misconception just to say you can go from ground zero. I don't know one thing. I'm going to walk into a shop. I'm going to go straight into saddle making. Where is the experience I had? Like I said, I would do a repair on saddles and make different things, and you learn to use the machinery and the tools. You just learn to work leather. You know, you just get an understanding of working leather. The saddle is the ultimate end of all that time spent just learning. And everybody's situation is different. I've told a lot of guys, you know, just get saddles in for repair. Do you know what the inside of a saddle even looks like? And go that route. There's good money in repair because you're not using as much material, you know, and you're learning what's in the darn thing, you know, what's in a saddle. And there seems to, like I say, there's kind of this misconception where they just want to jump in right away and just start making saddles, you know. And I think they get too far ahead of themselves. And I see their end result where they've missed out on a lot of knowledge. So that's one aspect I tell them about, you know, is just start doing repair and get an idea. And depending on what area you're in, if there's a saddle maker there that can take the time to show you, that's great. He can work with you on getting your pieces put together, you know. It's not easy, you know, because you're going to be so slow to start with. I would definitely say don't quit your day job, you know. If you think you're just going to jump right into it, and a lot of guys still do that. They don't listen. They're like, oh, I'm gonna jump out and just do it. And then they want to know, well, how much should I charge? How much should I charge for this or that? And I said, well, let me see what you're doing. And then I'll tell them usually, well, it's not worth anything because you're not doing a very good job. You know, you're not ready. You're not ready. You're just not ready. Well, will you take me and show me? No, I can't. I have over the years worked with a lot of guys. Man, some good experiences and some not so much. But anymore, I don't have any desire to. I certainly am on the phone with guys a lot, and if there are a certain point, I invite them over to come and watch. You know, it's another. I do everything I can to work with them. You know, but I can't walk anybody through an entire saddle, that kind of thing. So I mean, it's never tough. It's never been tough at any era, you know, that I've known. Old guys I worked with, you know, they if they're working for somebody else, you know, the income isn't very good. If you go out on your own, then of course you've got, depends on how much business sense you've got too. You know, how well you can work. It's also different. You know, what kind of a self-starter are you? You know,
mm-hmm.
And I'm sure I spent many discouraging years. You know, building up, but it's what I wanted to do. So I just kept doing it, and so it just varies. I talk to young guys all the time about their work. You know, usually.
So it seems to me like what you've described, Chaz, is if you were a young saddle maker and you wanted to go out on your own, when you go full time, when you're going to do that as your full time deal, it seems like it's a function of one, the quality of work you can do, and two, how quickly you can actually produce that saddle while maintaining the quality. Is that accurate? Because it seems like, you know, there could be someone who's really meticulous, and, you know, it's probably like anything, you just got to keep getting reps. But if it's taken you 3-4 months to do one saddle, that's not economically viable unless you can charge a whole lot for that saddle, right?
Yeah, usually if it takes you that long, it's not going to be that great. I mean, you're certainly not in a professional level.
Yeah. Do you have, for the young guys listening, like, if you had to come up with a rule of thumb, like, how long would you say the standard would be for making a quality rough out if you weren't working full time now and you wanted to make that jump?
A week.
40
hours. Yeah, if you can't make a rough out in 40 hours, it's pretty tough to make a living. And it's so different for everybody too. The pricing deal, you get into that too. I've used a formula for pricing for decades that Dale Harwood told me about, and it's so simple. You buy your material, you mark up your material, and that's something that's so important is to keep track. Write down on a tablet exactly how long it takes to make a plain saddle. In fact, I'm doing it on this saddle. I'm constantly reviving my work hour time that it takes me to make a saddle, and then say it's 40 hours. Well, what's your living situation? Are you married with little kids? Do you have a lot of overhead and a lot of payments? How much does it cost you to live? Figure it out. And that's if you can even make one in 40 hours. Sure. To get there, you first have to learn on your own or learn from somebody or something. So the first thing I tell all these guys, don't quit your day job. Don't think you're just going to jump out and all these, they usually the guys I would deal with are ranch guys, ranch cowboys, and they've worked with guys, and they're like, well, yeah, my buddy said he'd buy one right away, and that's great. I did the same thing. I've made saddles for every one of my friends, and but you just got to learn it first, and start with repair. Humble pie is your life for the next 2 years. Just do repair. Shaps are okay. Shaps are, really easy to make. You can learn to make those faster than anything. I've made hundreds of pairs of shaps. I look back through I've got more so all the time. I'm getting saddles I made in the 80s and 90s come up for resale. Somebody's died, and so I look up my old orders in boot boxes, the original order form, and they'll be like, in a month I would have made 5 saddles and 6 pair of shaps or something like that. It was always something it's cash flow. It's called cash flow. I've made hundreds of belts, hundreds of belts and stuff. And I'm not bragging. I'm just saying diversify it out. If you're actually going to, and start with belts. If you want to learn to flower carve, there's nothing better in the world than a belt. It teaches you to work through all the tools and stuff, and, don't get ahead of yourself. It seems like it's a funny thing, because I think I worked for such ornery son of a guns. Every guy I ever worked with was like a World War II vet, and he was still killing Germans or something. I don't know. They were just hard working, honest guys, and they didn't take any bull about anything. It's like you'd have to lose your arm to not come into work type of thing, and you work 6 days a week. And that's the guys I grew up with too. The cowboys that I grew up with were the same way. So it didn't bother me any, but, you just got to bear down and learn it, and realize that I think the worst thing, absolute worst thing I see on the internet now, on these guys will post stuff and this is my 4th saddle and boy am I happy with it, and it's just, oh man, just don't have that attitude, never be happy with it. There might be certain aspects that's going okay, but with that attitude, it just makes it so hard for them, because they're just not seeing the mistakes they're making, Sure. So I tell these young guys, if you're just getting started, I don't know, look around. Maybe, there are saddles, depending on your area. I really don't know what operating saddle shops there are now. It's been so long since I've dealt with any of them. Look around. Maybe there is somebody that'd hire you, but you're not going to make much. You're not going to make much money. You're going to, it's like going to school,
Well, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this, Chaz. While we're talking about getting guys started, this was another thing I've heard Carrie talk about, and some other saddle makers. we've talked to, and everybody's got their own different take on it. Do you think to be a good saddle maker, you need to have cowboyed at some point in your life?
Really, it really depends on your clientele a lot.
Okay.
That's the only thing I ever knew. I was never a trail rider. I was never a weekend rider, a recreation rider ever. It was all ranch. I grew up ranch, worked on ranches. That's all I knew was that usage for it, and that absolutely gave me that lifetime experience. It's like I know what it's like to have saddles with bad seats in it, or they hurt horses, or all the bad things that can happen. I know I didn't know until I started making saddles how good, how comfortable I could make one for me, that would fit me. And it was wonderful because I could do it on purpose then, because I knew how to do it. It just depends. I mean, are you there again? Saddles are so varied. I mean, like I explained earlier, where the cutters and ropers, they're a piece of athletic equipment. But still, and I know a lot of really good saddle makers that are avid team ropers and stuff, and that's they can make the stuff that works good. Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, have some past or interest in the horse world, for sure, because that's what you're making, is this piece of equipment that goes on a horse.
Yes, sir.
You don't have to be some top hand or anything, but it'd be like somebody ordering a sailboat from me. I wouldn't know where to start.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you mentioned making a seat that fits you, and like I said, the saddle you made me, I got here a couple months ago. I've really been enjoying that, and it's got a great seat. I feel like it kind of goes between. There's some saddles that are like kind of like that cutter. You said you can have them like real big and completely flat, and it's not like that. But then there are some, especially some Wade saddles I see that are almost too built up. Like even if maybe the measurement's right for somebody, they're a little built up in the front, so much so that they just kind of, if you look at it, it almost puts certain riders in like an awkward position, depending on who's sitting in it, So with that, you made a really good seat for me, but we've never met each other in person. The seat you made, did you make it kind of with me in mind, or have you kind of gotten a formula down to like a general seat that fits most riders?
Oh, much more general.
Yeah.
As you know, with a Wade, there's just absolutely nothing in front of you but the horn. And so to make it comfortable, and not, I'm not saying with a swell fork you need to be mashed up against it and depend on it, stay on the horse. But it doesn't matter to me if it's a Wade or a swell fork. I tend to put in a more narrow seat, like under your thighs, because of the grip aspect and the comfort. That was always the thing for me before I started making my own saddles, is I'm so short-legged, and it always felt like I was sitting on a barrel, which is horribly uncomfortable, to go very far at all. So I thought, well, let's just narrow that up. And then the other aspect is just have the part under your pin bones where you're sitting, that you don't want that round either. That's like sitting on top of a corral pole, and it hurts. So that should be flat, like sitting in a chair, So it was a thing that I imagined in my mind, and putting in a ground seat, it's literally sculpting. You put in pieces of leather and you shave them out. There's no mold for it or anything like that, and it becomes, after having made the number of hundreds of saddles I have, You train your eyes and your hands to that's how I form them. That's how I shape them. There's some people that they want them as high. They want them high, low, whatever. But I still make that shape a seat that's comfortable. I never do a wide, round, uncomfortable seat.
Yeah. The what you just described almost reminds me of those old tractor seats, like even some of the like horse-drawn tractors or like the 1940s tractor seats. We've still got some of those around here, like the metal seats laying around. We'll like put them on a stump and make like a stool for somebody or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
But that's kind of what it reminds me of.
Yeah.
Is you kind of have that flat part, and then it gets real narrow as it goes towards your legs.
Where I got the idea years ago, it was before I think it was before I started making saddles, and I would ride some custom saddles from different guys, and some okay, some not. The really, really old saddles that my dad had on the ranch that were made at were made at the really good saddle shops in Sheridan, Wyoming, were really comfortable. And they were nice and narrow. But one day I was with a friend, and we were going to go move some horses, and I didn't have my own saddle. All he had was an Australian saddle. He said, "Ride this." And I'm like, no, that doesn't have a horn. And he said, "Well, we're not going to rope anything." So I rode that, and oh my God, was it comfortable, because it was, kind of had the English saddle seat to it. It was real narrow. Mm-hmm. And I thought, man, that felt good. And I must have been making saddles at the time, because I got the idea that I can shape that ground seat any way I want. So let's try that. So I did it narrow and flat in the seat, and been doing them ever since. And
no kidding.
But still, doing custom ones, I ask people how. In most cases they just say, put in a comfortable seat. So as in your case, that's just fortunately what you got.
Yeah,
it's one of those.
It's worked out great. But I've sat in a fair few Australian saddles, and now that you mentioned that, I've never noticed one, to at least a well-made one, to kind of be uncomfortable in the seat. And that makes a lot of sense, because the seat does look almost exactly what you described, where it tapers real quick. So
yeah, they're just different than the Western saddle seat that you would normally see. And like I say, those really old saddles, old handmade saddles of my dad's, were so comfortable, and they had that nice narrow seat. For some reason or other, the guy knew how to make them that way.
Yeah.
And, there's so much discussion on shaping seats, and guys will go on and on about the low point in there, and the this and that and everything, and they'll ask me, and how do you do that? How do you do yours? And I said, well, mine all starts in the tree. I worked with a tree maker to develop the top of the bar to allow me to do that. You look at trees vary so much, and this is the top of the bar that you put your ground seat on, and there'll be a piece of wood. It's all wood that can be hand shaped, and you look at the top of that bar, and it'll be real round, and that comes all right up straight through the leather, because there's nothing. I'm just gluing leather in there. There's a galvanized tin seat plate, but I've worked with the tree makers now to where it's just sweet. It's just easy. I just glue the leather in and skive and follow the contour of the top of that bar, and I can come out with what I want. It's nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's other guys.
It's worked out for you.
I guess they're not using trees like that or something. Well, I know they're not. I've seen trees that different guys use, and usually those are guys don't ask me though.
Yeah. Right.
They don't want to know. They don't want to know.
Right. Well, Chaz, I'm curious. I know you're a big history buff, and you said you like to listen to a lot of like history books and podcasts while you're working. What part of history are you learning about right now?
Oh my gosh, I have jumped around. I recently, one thing leads to another a lot. I love Newt Gingrich's writing. He's an amazing historian, and he has written some. I guess he's got a term for it. It's called alternative history, but it's not that. And he wrote a 2 or 3 book series on what would have happened had Gettysburg turned out different.
Oh, yeah.
And it's funny, the very first time I listened to it, it went on and went around, and my hero of Gettysburg is the general that first got there. God, his name just left me. Oh, man. I'll think of it. And they had him, and in Newt's book, they had him getting killed, and I'm like, that's not right. You got that all wrong, and I didn't get it. So, but it led me to an intense, I don't know, months and months study of the Battle of Gettysburg. Every book I could get my hand on, and when I listened to books in my shop, I got my computer on with the maps of it on there, so I can, because Gettysburg is massive, 3-day battle involving tens of thousands and all kinds of movements and stuff. So then I could go back and listen to Newt Gingrich's book on how, I was familiar with the names of all the participants, all the Army guys' names, the generals, what really happened, the movements and everything. So, and then he did another series on Pearl Harbor, what would happen had that turned out different. And he had the Japanese coming in because they sent in 2 waves of bombers to Pearl Harbor, and had they done a 3rd wave, they would have completely decimated the entire Navy, United States Navy. So it's just thought provoking, but it's really fun it makes you get in and learn the absolute facts first. So you can see where he varies from it, Yeah.
So, and it's like you said, it's almost an exercise, and you can't really extrapolate all these what ifs unless you know exactly what happened.
Yeah. I've done the same thing. I spent years out. Of course, I'm like 100 miles from the Custer battlefield, and I've spent a lifetime studying that thing and all the ifs and what ifs and this and that's about it. It's fascinating to me. I live in as far as Western history, I live in a very extraordinary area, radius here of some of the most dynamic conflicts in Western American history. I'm just up the river from Pompey's Pillar, where Lewis and Clark left the only remaining signature on the rock, the only thing physically remaining of their entire trip, that his William Clark's signature is still in the rock, And then the Sioux War was huge here. We were on the very northern edge of it here at the Yellowstone River, but it runs down into Wyoming and eastern Montana and stuff. But so it's real fun to, it's not like it's a world away.
Yeah.
Get out and see the spots.
Do you have a favorite era or a favorite battle or anything like that?
Probably in world history or American.
Just in general, the whole deal.
Just in general. Well, I bounce around. I'm still pretty enamored with post-Revolutionary War, 19th century, I think, because it was, and just in all of it, just because everything was so brand new, I mean, the American West was like the moon, they didn't know what was here, to go from that and then understand through exploration and whatnot and how it's changed and everything, how fast civilization came into this, So I probably got 100 books in my Audible library now, I suppose. So there's some I just go back to, and I'm constantly looking for new ones.
Yeah. Have you always? Because ever since I've first talked with you, you seem like a giant history buff to me. Have you always kind of had an interest in this?
Always, all my life. I've was recently going through some boxes. My mom keeps everything. She's got 3 kids. She keeps all her grade school grades. And preschool, I was, and I don't know where I would hear about this stuff because I wasn't in school yet. I'm sure, literally all we had were magazines, and I would do, what does they call it when you cut stuff out of magazines and put them in a scrapbook? I scrapbook.
Oh, yeah.
And then I draw pictures of it, the Alamo and all the Civil War stuff and the Indian War stuff. And I think a lot of it was because of being right here, too,
Yeah. So this interest in history, obviously, it's not like you work in a museum or anything like that, but you do work with wood and leather and kind of have a more, I wouldn't say you're a craftsman and you have a very big reverence for the tradition of saddle making, clearly. Yeah. Do you feel like, part of that passion for history has led you to what you do for a living now?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, I do, because I wanted the Western saddle trade. Yeah, it's pretty old. It started, in the late 19th century, early 20th century. As far as the form we know now, the reason you make a Western stock saddle, and the reason has stayed the same. And there was a beginning tradition of doing excellent work. I can look back at those old Minas or Visalias or pre 20th century saddle makers, and you can just tell they were leather craftsmen. They had learned the trade, and they did beautiful work. It just doesn't matter what the era was or what the tree was; it's still the same thing. You're still starting with a tree, and you're wetting up leather, and you're covering that frame, and you can do a really beautiful job of it. So. Yeah. And the company I started with, the Conley Saddlery, had started in Billings in 1912, and they had set a standard for excellence. It's like getting on a really great team or something. It's like, don't be a dink, don't drop the ball on this deal because we have a reputation to uphold.
Right.
And so,
have you ever done like a deep dive? Like maybe gone and tried to look at a bunch of like really old kind of historical saddles. And when I say old historical, I mean like pre New World, like, what some Moor invading Spain was riding or something like that. Have you ever, just obviously saddle technology has come a long way and you're not making saddles like that, but have you ever dived into almost like the history of the saddle before?
No, but I would.
Yeah.
A great idea. Mainly because they're not around.
Sure.
But that's a really good idea. But I have, as a lifetime saddle maker, I have acquired somewhat of a knowledge of the evolution. Obviously, mostly American. I couldn't tell you anything about Egyptians rode saddles and Romans and then of course the English style, which was ridden in the East Coast by all the first settlers, but then of course the Spanish influence that came up from Mexico at the same time.
Yeah.
So
I remember in grade school, I guess it was high school, I took a European history class, and it was significant enough, at least to this teacher, that they talked about Western Europe and how people fought in Western Europe, and they talked about it pre-stirrup and post-stirrup and how it changed how people fought so much.
Yeah, that's really interesting how the stirrup was developed for warfare, because you could stand up, you could have more control of the bow and arrow and stuff. That's my understanding of it,
Yeah, and you could just all the different weapons you could like pre-stirrup. It would have been really hard to be a guy with a sword on a horse, right? Because it's a lot of weight shifting. You pretty much like the guy could have a spear and he could have a kill zone of like what was right in front of him. And they said it was a big game changer once you could send cavalry instead of like a wave, you could put them in there and they could kind of stay and have like a 360 presence around their horse. So yeah, it was interesting stuff for sure. So I was just curious about that because I know you're a big history buff. So I didn't know if you had any cool nuggets about that or not.
Well, it definitely is very special to work in a trade where obviously, I'm using the same tools other than I've got a sewing machine that runs on electricity and I've got better lighting. But other than that, this is 1890. I mean, leather tool is a leather tool. I'm not huge into machinery things. I got a new splitter back there I'm really proud of, a Cobra that I use all the time. And so, it definitely keeps you in touch, the past of your trade. The work's the same. It hasn't, there's been, we use stainless steel hardware now, which is way better, but there's just it's all the same,
Yeah.
And so it's historical.
Yeah. Oh, I did. Sorry if I'm so jarring, switching around topics, but I had one more question about my my saddle you made me, because I noticed just how you did the horn wrap, and I almost chuckled a little bit because I remember at one point we were talking about horn size, and you were talking about all these all the old timers, you see pictures of like Bill Dorrance and Tom Dorrance, and you're like, oh, those guys would wrap like old shirt sleeves around their horn, and they put like a million wraps on there, and they just do whatever to make those horns real big and fat, But I noticed most horn wraps that I see today, the rope strap on the right side, the horn wrap's anchored by that screw that also holds in the rope strap and then goes around. But I noticed you did a little different style on the saddle you made for me. Do you feel like there is a optimum way to do the horn wrap? Like, why did you choose that style?
Well, I like that with yours where, because that front lip of the wade where the leather gets rolled under, it's so susceptible to wear where the rope runs across it. Yeah. And so by wrapping, by covering that area as much as I can with the strip of mule hide, I just feel it gives it an advantage because you've got to wear through that strip of mule hide before you get to your fork covered leather.
Yeah.
And so I've pretty much been doing them all that way anymore. I've never, knock on wood, somebody's having to replace these things because I've seen used saddles. I mean, it's just worn, the guy is not paid attention or something, and he's just worn a groove right down through there. It needs to be replaced. So that's the only thing I know of is to protect that front gullet lip, and it works good. I hope, I know it works great. I hope it works good for you.
Yeah, it does. It actually, to get off, if you're going to like tie off and, take that, rope up under the rope that's running to the cow, it sits like where you put the rope strap over that lip. The rope sits perfectly kind of on that rope strap. So it kind of, to me, it looked like it was supposed to be there. Like it kind of fell into place, but I thought that was interesting that you did that.
And then on the right-hand side, when you're packing that rope, there's also, I run it through in two locations on that front lip. The one on the right-hand side lays under your rope, because even your rope, when it's tied up, and will wear that fork cover out. I've seen that. Just the friction of it moving. It's not solid. It moves and it it wears out that leather.
Yeah,
So
I've
this
got
way I try to
a
cover
couple
it.
saddles right now that's happening too.
Yeah, my stool's sticking. So
Cool. Yeah. Well, so we're getting towards the end here, and I know we've talked a lot about how saddle making is the way you do it. It's a very traditional art, or a very traditional craft. I am curious though, you've seen a lot of change in the industry. If you had to look into a crystal ball, what do you think the next 40 years of saddle making? Obviously, there's going to be somebody keeping the traditions alive. I feel pretty confident in that, but it's still going to evolve. How do you feel like, what do you feel like the next change might be? Whether it's for the maker or how the saddles are made or whatever.
um, good question. I have a lot of because I've seen it over the last 40 years, and I've seen it improve so vastly. The amount of the quality of saddle trees, the quality of tools, the quality of machinery. There's still the incredible amount of people buying saddles. You know, with the clinician industry. The amount of great instruction for people with horses. That wasn't even available. Well, maybe just beginning 40 years ago. So it's gotten better. Um, there's some really good craftsmen coming up. There's a couple. Not big bunches of them.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, advertising your business now with the internet is incredible. It's free and it's immediate, worldwide.
Yeah.
You can imagine the days before that. I mean, you'd have to print brochures and mail them out, and it was word of mouth, and you'd have to take orders over a telephone, and you'd have to take photographs and go get prints made, and that stuff is so much easier now. Just to do business. As far as the actual craft itself, it's never been any different. People will come and go. There'll be people start and they'll fade out. It's too hard. It's whatever. There's always somebody coming and going in the industry for sure. So I have a very optimistic view about the future of it. I think the level of horsemanship has definitely increased across the nation. And with those that pay attention to good tack, they'll always demand it. I've gotten a big kick out of, I've done this is my 48th year. And I think I told the story last time, but about 5, 6, 7 years ago, I told my wife, I said, all those guys that I've made saddles for all these years, they're my age, and I better appeal to their kids, and I did, and it worked. I've got one family. I think this is the 6th saddle I've made for that family because 2 for the parents, great. Now all the kids, and that's times however many occurrences that's been, and it's wonderful. Their parents have passed down to their kids. You need to write a really good saddle.
Yeah.
Here it is. And so, no, I think it can only get better. This tool thing is phenomenal. I got a really good friend in Cody, Wyoming now making the most incredible leather knives ever. They're called round knives for cutting leather. And I've got about 10 of them, I think now. And stamping tools are easy to get from Barry King. All the tools are much easier. Back when I started out, they didn't exist. Except for the old ones, if you can get your hands on them.
Sure.
So it's gotten better, gotten way better. Leather's great. The quality of leather is upheld, it's better than ever. Saddle trees. Yeah. There's young guys getting into making saddle trees that are way better than the stuff I started with. I mean, way better. They fit horses better. The saddles you make out of them are prettier. They're nicer. One new thing that's coming into the industry is instead of covering a tree with rawhide, they cover them with fiberglass. And I've yet to use one. I've got an order coming up, and I'm going to try it. And but there's some really good saddle makers, like my friend Terry Henson swears by it. It's every bit as strong. They're not like lighter or anything like that, but they're just super strong.
Yeah. I've got a friend in Washington. He was picking my brain about what I thought about rawhide covered trees. Because he's got a couple saddles that are rawhide covered. And he mentioned where he's at, just being in a humid area. He said, I swear that saddle, I can tell it's heavier on days that it's rained.
Yeah. Don Gonzalez really opened my eyes up about that. He's down in the Texas Gulf, and he said it's just so humid there that it's bears the same in Hawaii. Those rawhide trees just rot, because rawhide's rawhide. No matter how much lacquer or finish they put over the rawhide, it never quits shrinking, and you can wet it up again and it'll get soft and mushy, whereas the fiberglass is water resilient. So yeah, good for them. Good deal. They use a lot of them in Texas.
Yeah. So that it's interesting to me, Chaz, because obviously there's some things where you're like very traditional, it seems like, in your opinion, but then there's potential, like you said, for the fiberglass to make things better. What is there like a line in your head in terms of materials you can use on a saddle and you still keep all your street cred, and then you can't?
Yeah. Well, I've been, the last guy to go to, to swear and buy fiberglass, only because of the kind of the image of it, because there again, the cheap saddles, the cheap tree, the old cheap trees used to be covered with canvas. The Mexican trees were covered with really, we called it, dog hide and stuff, because it was so thin and poorly done. So it's always got to be good, American bull hide. That's the thing that worked the best. And I still will always use rawhide covered trees. I mean, right. As long as I can get it, that's the thing. The three tree makers I use, all use nothing but rawhide, and I'll stick with that till the end, but I'll try one. Because I highly respect the opinion and experience of some of these guys that are using it. I mean, I'm not going to say, no, you're full of beans. I don't believe you. I would never do that, because they've had vast experience with it,
Right.
So, yeah, I'll sure try it. Yeah.
Okay. I buy that.
But you still don't flyer stamp rough out, though. There's my line.
Sure. I buy that too. It is cool. At least for me, it seems like the more time I kind of spend growing, like in my line of work, for example, in the beginning when you're introduced to this stuff, it's like you got your guys here that got your like Wade saddles and slick fork, and then you got your guys here, and and there's just all these different groups. But it is cool, you're talking about someone from Texas. You can still recognize someone who's really good at their craft. Like that's for me. I don't think I ever harbored too much prejudice, but now even more, like I can watch someone who's using a completely different tack than I am to work with a horse, and I think I'm more open to, well, they're really setting that horse up in a good spot, right? And it's kind of the similar deal, I feel like, with you, like even though they're maybe making a different type of saddle than and I know you've made a lot of different types of saddles, but maybe their bread and butter, just because of the region they're in, is different than your bread and butter. But it's cool that you can still have such an appreciation for
good. Covering that frame is what it's about. And to me, it's immaterial, the shape of the fork. I mean, there's obviously some that will always be more attractive to me. The great big freak type looking forks and a little weird horn is just never going to be as attractive to me. And I'm glad I'm not having to do them. Really, because I've been really blessed with, which I consider to be, these beautiful style. I mean, you can just make a beautiful style out of it. You can make a beautiful saddle out of a nice shaped frame. And I like the styles the way they are now. I like them a lot. I think that's vastly improved. Just the style. But there's, like, for instance, those Don King and Chester Hape trophy saddles. Those are pure arena style team roper, calf roper styles, and those are some of the most gorgeous pieces that'll ever be done. And they're just their craftsmanship level was so phenomenal. That they'll always just, to me, be set in the highest standards of craftsmanship.
Sure.
Yeah, love those things.
Yeah,
and
that's cool. Well, Ches, I really appreciate you taking time to talk with us, man.
Always.
Like I said, I know I've got a saddle from you that I really like, and Ben's pretty excited about his. I think that's coming up, and yeah, it's cool, man, because we get to talk to a lot of really interesting people who are really passionate about their craft, but very rarely do you get to talk to anyone who has as much experience as you do now in what you're doing. So it's really cool to get your perspective on things. So we appreciate you taking time out of your day and time away from making saddles to share some of this, because it's really cool.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it very much too. It's my I'm on second base now, I guess. I don't know. Second time I've talked to you.
Yeah.
So that's an honor. Exactly. I appreciate it very much.
Cool.
Keep up the good work.
Yeah. Well, I know at this point you're pretty you're pretty full up, but if someone maybe is listening to this and just heard of you for the first time, you're on Instagram and Facebook and everything, aren't you? If they want to look up some of your
pretty
work,
regular. I like to post on a regular basis. I guess it tells people I'm still alive. I think the people I have made the saddle for, I think they appreciate seeing their saddle on there. I've been told that, they
for sure.
They like that. I'm not real serious about it. I usually kind of make light of things a bit, even though I'm exceedingly serious about what I do.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of fun to, and I love it when other guys do that too. I mean, I really do. I mean, there again, this another advantage to this day and age is that, in previous years, you'd have to go to a guy's shop or something to see his work, and this way, those that post on a regular basis, I really enjoy, and I've learned so much, from people in all stages. Man, you can blow up those little pictures and see things of how they've done it, and I've gotten a lot of ideas from that, and it's constant. It's every day. It's changing every hour, in a lot of ways.
Well, and from a business perspective, I'm one of your clients. Say I'd never heard of you before, and we're 2,000 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
All I got to do is look at my phone, and I can see, basically your resume for the last, 5 years or however long you've been on Instagram, right? And so I don't have to call you and get photos and hem and haw about, well, I don't know this guy from Adam. Like, I can pretty instantly see your body of work that you've put on there, and I think for saddle makers or any kind of craftsman, that has been such a valuable tool for them, especially those guys we were talking about that are just starting out. They might not have the name that someone like you does, but they can at least put everything out there into the universe and see what comes back at them.
Yeah, and you can communicate too, on all these different, I call them channels, the Instagram or Messenger or whatever. You can, and I do communicate with people. I'll compliment things that people do and back and forth. And I've, developed obviously friendships with probably quite a few that I've never met, never met them, in person.
Sure.
So makes it nice.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well,
and your show helps a lot. It does. I mean, just, it's one thing to see pictures of people or communicate digitally or whatever, but it's nice to hear their voice too sometimes about what they do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And have, not that I'm a saddle maker, but have conversations like this and kind of be able to pick someone's brain. It's so valuable. That is one thing, there's pros and cons to going into the brave new world, right? But there's so much information available now for if you're motivated to go down a path like saddle making or horse training or whatever you want to do.
Exactly. And it's right at your fingertips, and it's wonderful. This day and age of information and education. It's wonderful. I couldn't live without Audible, It's like,
yeah, exactly.
Because my interest is, if you want to know something, dig it out. It's there.
Exactly. Cool. Well, we're going to stop recording, Chaz, but stay on the line a minute. And again, thanks for making time for us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Howdy there, listener. If you enjoyed this episode of On the Move, here's a couple things you can do to help us out. First of all, you can head on over to Spotify, Apple, or Google, or wherever you listen to this podcast, and leave us a review. And give us a 5-star rating. If you can't do 5, do 4. If you really can't do 4, do 3. Don't go lower than that, but give us a rating. Additionally, if you haven't already, follow us on the social channels. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and now apparently on TikTok. However, I don't have TikTok, and I'm not sure how that works. I'm sure you guys do. Now, if you'd like to support us monetarily, which we would so very appreciate, head on over to www.onthemovepodcast.com. There you'll find our merch. We got some cool hats, got some mugs, some stickers, all the latest On the Move merch, so you can be out there rocking it. And these hats are nice. They're good quality. Joe and I wear them all the time. Also, if you are getting ready to build a steel building, maybe a barn dominium, garage, new horse run-in shelter, or you need an innovative steel fencing system, head on over to our friends at www.metalmdi.com/on the move. And they can help you find a great deal. Well, that's about it, folks. You can find all these links in our bio. Until next time, stay on the move.